Today, the USA Patriot and Freedom Acts, data retention, and so-called terrorism in the UK. Your host is Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 23, 2015. Last week's news was undoubtedly the lapse of Section 215 of the US Patriot Act, followed by the enactment of the USA Freedom Act. They know how to label these laws, don't they? What essentially happened was that provisions for mass surveillance lapsed for the NSA. So, as The Onion put it, the NSA is now forced to resort to still secret mass surveillance programs. And then, on Wednesday the same week, another law passed that re-enabled mass surveillance. However, the NSA was not allowed to do the same thing again. Instead, it's being passed on to telecom providers. So instead of the NSA getting a tap on AT&T gets to do the surveillance itself. Interestingly, this concept is called data retention, and it mirrors what was mandatory in the European Union for quite some time. Data retention was approved by the European Parliament on December 15, 2005. Possibly December 14. Anyway, in December 2005, and came into effect a number of years and in a number of member states later. However, many member states protest against this, considered this kind of mass surveillance to be incompatible with human rights. A full third of member states never implemented or struck down the Data Retention Directive in the European Union. And in April 2014, a full 8.5 years after the European Parliament had approved data retention in the European Union, the European Court of Justice struck down the directive as fundamentally incompatible with basic human rights, as in, if you are not under formal and individual suspicion of a serious crime, then the government has no right to invade your privacy for purposes of crime prevention. And this was a landmark decision. The European Court of Justice went so far as to say that not only was the directive no longer in effect, the directive was so violatory that the court struck it down retroactively. The European Court of Justice said that this directive has never existed. It has never been in effect. That was quite strong. Now, several member states in Europe, or a bit over half actually, still have data retention laws. And those have not been struck down by the European Court of Justice. What was struck down was the federal level directive requiring member states to have such data retention. It has not been tried at the European Court of Justice if a member state is allowed to have such data retention. And I'm afraid it would have to be tried on a state-by-state basis, as these laws vary just ever so slightly from member state to member state. Nevertheless, it has been found that what the USA Freedom Act mandated at the federal level in the United States, it has been found that this is fundamentally incompatible with human rights at the federal level in the European Union. And obviously this is to catch terrorists. It has always been to catch terrorists and organized crime and drug trade and other very serious crimes. At least that's what they say in media. And then there's this little rider tacked onto that, comma and. And you basically end up with, and non-violent protests. And I'm not making that up. Terrorism in the United Kingdom has now diluted to the point where non-violent political dissent is included in the concept. The UK Minister of the Interior, Theresa May, has even gone so far as to promote censorship of what she labels non-violent extremism. non-violent extremism. That essentially means disagreeing with the government. It means disagreeing with the government to some degree, but to what degree is completely unknown and uncertain in that concept. So, anything the government disagrees with enough, it would be at liberty to label extremist, even if non-violent, nota bene, and apply terrorist laws against it. It is in the light of this that David Cameron's initiative to remove the United Kingdom from the European Convention on Human Rights must be regarded. David Cameron has been insistent that a UK court must have the final say on whether the UK has violated human rights or not. In other words, David Cameron refuses to let the European Court of Human Rights have the final say in whether the UK should be convicted. And the only reason for requiring a UK court to have a veto over the European Court of Human Rights is to negate convictions against the United Kingdom for violating human rights. That is the only, I say again, only reason for such a demand. So whenever you hear that this will only be applied against terrorists, do remember that government dissent has already been labelled terrorism. I'm Rick Falkfinger and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.